now it's time to meet the candidates. We're going to start off with them giving a brief statement about their background and their vision for the future of the department. And then we're going to go to questions. And we just ask that if you ask the question one, the other candidate will get a chance to answer the question also. I don't have a coin to decide who goes first, so...
John can decide. Either way is fine.
Go ahead, Steve.
I can go first if you like me to. Go ahead.
That's fine.
Okay. Sergeant Bowe mentioned his favorite fire story. I have my favorite fire story when I was a patrol officer. I worked overnights, graveyards, you know, when you get off at 7 a.m., middle of the summer, and we get a call, the dispatcher gets a call of a massive conflagration. A couple people reported it. And, you know, he sent out 3 or 4 fire stations, and I'm working, and I'm looking for this fire, and I can't find the fire, and they said, it's over this direction, over this direction. It took us about 15 minutes to figure out that finally what they were reporting was the sun rising in the east. And, we had to report that, try as we might, we could not put out the sun. But, my name is Steve Strachan, and I'm your King County Sheriff, and I have to tell you, I'm really, really proud to be here tonight in the White Center area. Some of you, many of you know me. I've met many of you before, but I've been with the Sheriff's Office. I was unanimously confirmed by the County Council back in April as the Sheriff, and I've been with the King County Sheriff's Office since 2011. And prior to that, I was for several years the Chief of Police in Kent, and I was a Chief in the Midwest before that. I've been a law enforcement officer for 25 years, and as I mentioned, I've been at the Sheriff's Office since last year, since 2011. And I'm really proud to be a South King County person. I live in SeaTac, and this is an area that, again, we have a real connection with. I know BJ very, very well, and we've spent some time together. You're talking about the alcohol impact zone, something that we did in Kent, and it's a program that we brought here. We're going through the same thing we did in Kent, by the way, where sometimes compliance isn't what you expect it to be, but over time you start to see an improvement, and it's something that, again, I'm bringing from my experience and the fact that I've been a chief for quite a long time. It's also really strange to be standing in front of you, not in a uniform. I hardly ever wear a suit as the sheriff, but technically I'm here as a candidate tonight, so I'll speak to you more as the sheriff, but if you have any questions about candidate issues, I'm happy to answer that. The other thing that I would mention is, having been the sheriff now for a few months, is it's been a really good experience for me, and it's one of the things that former Sheriff Rohrer was looking for, was to bring an outside perspective as having been a municipal chief and coming into the Sheriff's Office. It's a good department. We have a really good department, the King County Sheriff's Office. The men and women of the King County Sheriff's Office, I am very, very proud to work with them, and you know some of them, and you see them a lot, and you can see the connection they have with our community. But the fact is, we can also improve. We can always get better. We should always be looking at ways to get better. And bringing my outside perspective is something that Sue Rohrer saw as sort of a need for us, and to be able to come in and say, what do we do it this way? How can we do it differently? And that's sort of what we're doing right now. We're going through a lot of changes at the King County Sheriff's Office. So I just want to briefly talk a little bit about that. Where we're going, and you know, ultimately where we're trying to go, and the question you had is, what is our vision? My vision is that we are a department that is effective and respectful and accountable. Effective, respectful, and accountable. And what effective means is that we're good at fighting crime, that we focus on high-impact offenders, again, something that we did in Kent and saw some real success with. This is what high-impact offenders means. We talk a lot about auto theft and burglary. That is a chronic problem. You'll see spikes in auto theft and burglary. And again, having worked in the city of Kent, we saw this. The best way to go after that with the limited resources that law enforcement has is to identify and go after that relatively few number of people that are doing a lot of burglaries and auto thefts. We would arrest people that were doing dozens of burglaries and dozens of auto thefts, often for for reasons of drug use. If you can identify them, work with all the other agencies to really go after them and target them and take them out, you can really start to affect crime. But you need good intelligence, good analysis, and you have to tie it all together, connect the dots. And that's what effective means, and that's exactly what we're going to work on. When I talk about respectful, that means that we carry ourselves with humility. All the things that we're going through right now with Seattle and some of the issues with the SPD, a lot of that has to do with how the community is viewing us. We need to own that stuff. We need to own how we act, how we communicate, carrying ourselves with humility. I've gone to all of our in-service trainings at the King County Sheriff's Office so that I can speak face-to-face with all of our department members and say, guys and gals, we have to carry ourselves with humility, because that's important in law enforcement, especially now. We're also doing some really good things with procedural justice, which means to listen and explain with equity and dignity. To over-explain so people know what's going on. That increases compliance and increases safety, both for the people we're dealing with and for us. That's something that we are integrating already at the King County Sheriff's Office, because that stuff matters especially now. And we have to lead the way on it. And finally, we're going to be accountable to ourselves and to the public, which means we have to have better training, better supervision, better expectations. And as the sheriff, that's exactly what I've been doing, making very clear what our expectations are. What is okay and what is not. As a King County deputy, we have to make that extremely crystal clear. And then making sure we have good quality training, which I have increased since I've become sheriff, making sure we have good active supervision. If you read anything about some of the issues law enforcement's having right now, it's all about supervision, training, and expectations. And again, having been a chief before, I've done this before. I know how it works. I don't know everything, but I know that. We're going to lead the way on that. And then finally, it comes down to this, and I'll be very, very brief. I don't mean to talk too long. At the end of the day, what are we here for? What's the King County Sheriff's Office here for? What is Sergeant Bo here for? What is BJ here for? They do great work. What's their job? Their job is to keep people safe. That is what we do. $150 million budget for the King County Sheriff's Office. $150 million. 1,000 employees. And Mishy was talking a little bit about all the different units we have and all the things we do. Every single one of those people, APHIS, the fingerprint people, dispatchers, CSOs, deputies, me, what's my job? To keep people safe. So how do we focus like a laser with what we have to keep people safe? And that's exactly where we're going, is to get it right, focus on what we're doing, hold people accountable, and continue to do the good work, but even elevate it as we move forward. And I have to tell you, having been the sheriff now for a few months, I love being the chief in Kent. It's a great city, great department. I chose to leave there because right now is a really good time to be the sheriff, because we can lead the way. It's a separately elected position, and we can lead the way to really improve law enforcement. And it's a unique opportunity in a nonpartisan position. This is not a Republican or Democrat position. Nonpartisan, who can ask the question, what do you really want to do about limiting access to guns for people with unmanaged mental illness? You know, are we having a good conversation about that? Not really. How do we start to have that conversation? Have a conversation about marijuana and medical marijuana and access to it. That's reasonable. That's a good, open conversation that we're not talking past each other. That's why I took this job, and that's why I am so honored to be your sheriff. So with that, I'm happy to turn over to John. Thank you.
Thanks, Steve, and thank you all for coming, for having us both here. This is actually a lot of fun for me to come to the North Highline UAC, because I used to do that. I used to come here just like Deputy Myers does when I was a young deputy. And somebody I know is going to say, wait a minute, you were never a young deputy. And they're more or less right. But I would come here and speak about the crime problems that North Highline was having, Boulevard Park, South Park, because I worked down here out of the Burien Precinct almost all of my career, at least until I went downtown. I say when I was a real police officer, when I did real police work, I worked out of the Burien Precinct. I was assigned to SeaTac, to Boulevard Park, to White Center, to South Park. I love this area. I would come back here. I would have come back here in a heartbeat had my career gone along those lines. It just didn't happen to. But I've been a police officer for 36 years, both full-time and part-time. I went to the University of Washington. I've lived in King County virtually my whole life. I've been married for 37 years. I have 2 daughters, aged 27 and 30. My youngest daughter lives in New York City. She's adopted Korean. She's about this tall. But she's lived there in New York for a year, and she's really turned into the consummate New Yorker. We went and visited her over Memorial Day. And she can hail a cab with the best of them. She takes us on the subway. She just knows how to act in New York, despite her small stature. I went to the University of Washington. I graduated from the School of Business, and I started a business. I was a wholesaler in Bellevue of electrical construction material, wire, conduit, light fixtures, circuit breakers, that sort of thing. I built that business up over the next 12 years, had 60 employees. I had 4 locations, and eventually I sold the business, took a couple years off, and then went full-time with the King County Sheriff's Office, where I've been for the last 24 years. Been a patrol officer, master police officer, a field training officer, a sergeant, an undercover vice detective, undercover narcotics detective. And about 10 years ago, I went downtown and started working for Dave Reichert, and then eventually for Sue Rahr. And as Dave describes it, I turned into a senior policy advisor for him and for Sue Rahr. So I've done a lot of the administrative things down there. I had more face time with both sheriffs than any other officer in the department. I've worked with the county council on budget issues. I've worked with the, well, we know it's not the sheriff calling you, Ted. Found it. I've worked with the county council. I worked with the county executive on all kinds of issues. And in January, I retired. And I planned on staying retired, quite frankly. I had no intention of running for sheriff. But I started getting calls from people inside the sheriff's office after January, at all levels, from civilians up through command staff. And basically what they told me is, John, you need to come back and run for sheriff. We've got some problems here in the sheriff's office. And I said, no, maybe. And then I started looking into what the problems are that they were talking about. And I decided, yes, I do need to run for sheriff. And Steve and I, we meet on these various functions fairly often. And quite frankly, we don't always agree. Well, we almost never agree. But one thing we do agree on, the rank and file in the sheriff's office, the people that work in the sheriff's office, civilians and commission, are some of the finest people I have ever met. It's been a pleasure, an honor to work with them all these years. No doubt about that. They are absolutely tremendous. But the sheriff's office right now is headed down the wrong road. We are headed down the road, I still say we, even though I'm retired, we are headed down the road where the Justice Department is going to come into the sheriff's office just like they've come into the city of Seattle. And in the city of Seattle, you had 34 community organizations, plus the ACLU, plus Mike McKay and John McKay, among others, and they went to the Department of Justice and they said, hey, there are some problems in the Seattle Police Department, and we need the Justice Department to come in and fix what's going on there. And a senior Justice Department official said, the Seattle Police Department is broken. He said that publicly. I don't believe that. I don't believe that to be the case. But the reality is that the communities lost faith in the Seattle Police Department, and they lost faith in their ability to fix what was wrong. And that's where we are headed. That's where the sheriff's office is headed if there aren't changes made. Now, when I announced that I was going to run, which was back in April, I talked about 4 things. I talked about shooting review boards. In 2011, there were 4 officer-involved shootings in the sheriff's office that required, 2 of those were fatal, that required a shooting review board be convened within 30 days of the inquest or 30 days of the close of the investigation. Those shooting review boards weren't held until the following year. One was held the day before I announced, the other 3 within 2 weeks after I announced I was running. I believe that's the reason they were finally held. I talked about internal investigations, the unit that takes complaints from citizens and then investigates those, and how that unit had been decimated from 3 experienced sergeants down to 2 sergeants that had a combined level of experience investigating those types of complaints of about 7 months. Now the captain was about to be transferred out of the unit, and the 2 detectives, the 2 sergeant detectives, would report to the sheriff. That's not the way to do internal investigations. I talked about all the investigations, a whole slew of investigations that bypassed internal investigations, were sent to patrol sergeants to investigate. Patrol sergeants that don't have the expertise, the training, the time to do those kinds of investigations. And now we've just learned recently that over 100 citizen complaints against King County police officers disappeared. They were lost, and they can't be found. This was in April. 2 months later, 3 months later, an audit came out, an outside audit of the sheriff's office. And those 4 issues that I talked about were brought up in the audit, along with a slew of others. And one of the things the audit said was the leadership inside the sheriff's office doesn't take officer discipline seriously, among other things. So there was a culture in the sheriff's office among management that didn't take officer discipline seriously, that didn't follow their own processes that are in our operations manual, and they should be. And that audit is online. You can read that. Now, 2 months after that, last week, a second audit came out, ordered by the Office of Law Enforcement Oversight. Independent audit, Merrick Bob out of Los Angeles. Both of these are very respected firms that have done these 2 audits. And they talked about shooting review boards and use of force reports that aren't being done. Shooting review boards that are essentially a rubber stamp of what happened. And they can't be trusted. The shooting review boards are not necessarily a good reflection of what really happened. And those types of things need to be fixed. Those are the things that I'm looking at. That's why I am running for sheriff, so we can fix these individual issues that are going on. It's not being addressed now. And they have to be, or the Justice Department will be into the sheriff's office. And if they do come in, it's going to be very, very, very expensive, and it's a black eye on the sheriff's office. Sheriff's office is the second largest local police agency in the state of Washington, and about the 12th or 13th largest sheriff's office in the country. It's a big department. And these types of things should be going on, and I plan on fixing them. Now, we'd love to take questions, I'm sure.
Can I ask a question? I didn't talk about John Urquhart. He talked a lot about me. Have I got an opportunity to respond to that? I don't. This is not a debate, however. I mean, this is about public safety, so I don't want to take up your time. But I didn't talk a lot about John Urquhart.
Well, it sounds like since you discussed there, it ain't really your problem. It was before yours that all these problems have been going.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And I'll be very brief. And again, this is not a debate. I don't need to get into that. I mentioned I took this job from my position as the chief in Kent precisely because I saw these issues and an opportunity to really make improvements at the King County Sheriff's Office. It's why I'm here and why I'm doing exactly what I am doing. We're making a lot of changes, and we're making them quickly, and not everybody's comfortable with change. John refers to the fact that people are calling him and saying that he needs to run. Two things. Number one, some people aren't comfortable with change. They aren't. They're uncomfortable with leadership. Number two, check your facts. Talk to anybody that you want, rank and file, command staff, anybody you may know. Feel free to ask, and I feel very comfortable that you're going to get an answer that is going to be generally, there's a lot of change and not everything is perfect, but the fact is we're going in the right direction. The other thing I'd mention is John takes a couple facts from audits. They're on the web. Read them. He talks about the fact that our leadership is strong and we're doing some very good things and we're moving in the right direction. That's what both audits say. I would mention as well that Councilmember Julia Patterson, in the hearing that we had, you mentioned you watched this, Liz, it was a good, robust policy discussion that the media sometimes sensationalizes and people take and try to politicize. But the fact is, Julia Patterson said specifically, this is about 2005 to 2011, the time period during which I was the chief in Kent and not here. It was about the fact that this is a long-standing issue with the King County Sheriff's Office. And as the sheriff, I'm not going to criticize those who came before. That's not my job. My job is to lead and to go forward with it. That's what I'm going to focus on. And I ask you simply not to let this be politicized. The fact is, our public perception, the trust in our community is too important to get dragged down into politics. So I would like to focus on your questions about public safety, and hopefully I've answered some of the things that John said. So thank you very much for your time.
Now, just to answer your question, which is sort of the same, sir, is that Steve came in January of 2011. And at that point, Sue Rahr, my boss, put out an email to everybody in the department. And she said that Steve is going to be running the day-to-day operations of the Sheriff's Office beginning in January of 2011. And then our operations manual, which is about 900 pages, every single reference to the sheriff and what she would have authority over, such as termination letters, suspension letters, shooting review board, every reference to the sheriff was changed to chief deputy. So I certainly agree with Steve. He's only been the sheriff since April, but he's been running the sheriff's office for the last 20 months. So really, this has to fall at least some on Steve. Some of these changes that I was talking about, shipping the investigations down to the patrol level, to patrol sergeants, 100 cases that disappeared. That was his decision. That was Steve's decision. He made that in March of 2011 and shipped those down there and only brought them back this July after this audit started coming out to criticize that policy.
Another question.
Yes.
You mentioned review boards.
Yes, shooting review boards.
You know, every time I see the police department in Seattle, whenever they get these review boards going, and instead of getting somebody, a homeowner that lives in the community, people are on those review boards that are high up in the echelon. It seems like, and I'd like to see if they're going to put somebody on the review board, get a regular citizen to be on these review boards.
I agree 100%. I agree 100%. The review boards are too insular. And actually, one of the audits, and I agree with Steve, you should go to the web and read those two audits. Don't believe me. Don't believe Steve. Come to your own conclusions about what's going on in the sheriff's office. And one of their conclusions was, yes, there should be a civilian on the shooting review boards. And it shouldn't be a shooting review board, it should be a use of force review board, which we don't have. to review all levels of force, including shootings.
Was that a question? Okay. So, again, I'll go back to, I just want to show a little contrast here. If you look at the audits, they talk a lot about what has come before. The fact that John has talked about the fact that he was a senior policy advisor, but I don't stand here and point my finger because my focus is on where we're going. My focus is on being the sheriff and leading where we're going instead of spinning around about the past. And you talk a little bit about civilian oversight on a review panel. The use of force review group that was referred to in the audit just a couple days ago is something we've been working on for months, and it's starting this month. Part of that is because as sheriff, I sent a group of our deputies, our guild, and some of our command staff to Los Angeles to take a look at how it worked there. It's not perfect, but they have some good ideas, and it's different than what we do. And that's one of the changes we made because it really increases consistency and accountability of our command staff. So it isn't just about the deputy, it's about our managers and making sure that they're doing their jobs, because that's critical. So we've been working on that for quite some time. Again, it's part of the changes that I'm making. Some people aren't entirely happy with it. Citizen person on a panel that you mentioned, if you watch the audit, it's available on the web. That's one of the recommendations. I agreed with it. It needs to be bargained with the guild, and it's something that we're moving forward on. So, thank you.
Are meetings of the review board open to the public, and if not, why not?
Should I start with that one? Undetermined right now. It's something, again, that has to be, we need to flesh that out and find out. Again, so many of these things have to be bargained with the guild because of labor law and the fact that we have past president. It's in our contract right now. That's a really good question, and it's a good takeaway for me because if it's open to the public, I'm hearing you say that's something you'd be interested in seeing in terms of increasing transparency. So, thank you.
How do you feel about it?
I agree. I see no reason we shouldn't. Steve oftentimes talks about transparency, as do I. And I think that's the best way to make it transparent is make it open to the public. We have nothing to hide, or shouldn't have anything to hide.
I have another question. This takes us to a totally different area. I'm sure everyone here is well aware that Metro has changed many routes and everything. There's still some sore people out there, but I'm interested in the contract that Metro has with the Sheriff's Department for oversight of protection and what have you. And I also want to say that when I was down in the city a few weeks ago, I noticed a band of sheriff's officers on bicycles. And I assumed they were checking out all the different points of danger down there, but for the Metro riders.
That's exactly right. We have a contract with Metro Transit as well as Sound Transit. So we are responsible, have primary responsibility for the buses, the bus routes, the bus shelters, the park and ride lots, as well as the bus tunnel. And we do a lot of work in conjunction with the Seattle Police Department in downtown Seattle because that's basically where all the people are.
We're wondering, some of us here, if you and Metro really get together on a bus stop that you put up at on Barton and what, 26th?
Between 26th and 29th. Yeah.
26th and 29th, but it's right next to a playground, and it's right across from a school, isn't it, or close to a school? No, that isn't the school there, sorry.
Park.
But anyway, we're concerned about the whole darkness of the park and things like that, and whether the park should have a lot more lighting in it than it does, and how safe that is. But we're also concerned about crossing different intersections to get to the bus. So I don't know how much say you guys have in it, but
I'm going to shift to sheriff and write this down. So
I do think that the group should be conferring about this,
Absolutely.
as well as the Seattle Police have been, I'm sure.
And not only Metro Transit, but the Sheriff's Office, the Seattle Police Department, the City of Seattle was in the city with those types of issues, absolutely.
I'm sorry, address one more time.
Huh?
Address one more time. The address
Where
where the bus stop is?
The bus stop, it's a new transit center for Rapid Ride C, right?
C.
Oh, C line.
54, and it's on Barton.
Southwest
between-
Barton Street between 26th Southwest and 29th Southwest.
Got it, thank you.
It's by Target.
Got it.
Yeah,
Okay,
it's right
thank you.
across from ours.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, if anybody else got something, just butt in because I'm taking a lot of room here. But I want to speak well of the King County Sheriff's Department because I just retired 43 years driving for Metro. And when I would call in, it didn't take long for a sheriff to come and get people off my bus that were making trouble.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for your service, by the way. Can I if I can just expand a little bit on that, you talked about Metro Transit deputies, and that's kind of a misunderstood role because you see them in their cars, but a lot of them are undercover on buses, especially on the rapid ride routes, because it's such a priority right now for Metro to make sure that those are really safe and comfortable. So you'll have undercover deputies, gang issues, drug issues. I went riding with them one day, which was an interesting experience. Tried to stay out of their way. And then there's also the uniformed officers, and then the bike officers are mostly downtown, but they've been working more with Federal Way and Kent and some of our partners to the south. And but they focus a lot on 3rd downtown between Pike and Pine and sort of the International District. And just one thing I want to mention, it's a good news, and you hear all these bad stories about issues with mental illness and use of force with people, cafe racer and those kinds of issues in Aurora. But we have mental illness and drug dependency training now that was funded by the county council a couple years ago. You may be familiar with that. It is really cool, I have to be honest with you. There's an 8-hour class and a 40-hour class. Our Metro Transit deputies deal a lot with people with mental illness or drug dependency issues at the bus stops. It's a critical part of their job. And I was riding on those bikes. They got me a B uniform, and I was riding with the bikes a couple weeks ago. And we come up to these, there was one who was a methadone addict and the way he was acting, and another who was clearly mentally ill. And from their training, you could see them approach a different way and use their hands in a different way and talk to them in a different way. And then when we would be done, I'd say, what was that? And they would tell me, you have to give them an avenue of escape. You don't want to look them, get too close up in their face because it's very threatening. And again, when you hear all the bad stories about interactions of use of force and law enforcement and the mentally ill and people with unmanaged mental illness, it's a success story. I mean, it's one of those I thought, this is so cool. This is exactly what we should be doing, and it's that kind of training that we're starting to build in. So just want to mention that.
I have one. Now, I actually live in Seattle, but my oldest son works for King County. He's a grant writer now because he got MS the day he became a sergeant. But one problem I have, and I know it probably doesn't happen in the county, but this happened in Seattle because it happened to me. My husband was brought home drunk. Now, they brought him home that the reason they stopped him was that he had, didn't turn his lights on. So he was out on the road without any lights on. And it was the way the police officer treated me. Now, I had nothing to do with this. I was embarrassed enough. I had 2 of my 4 children standing there listening to this young man with using language that under no should be used at him.
If I can start with that one. As the sheriff and when I was a chief, when I got those calls, I would just go. Because the phrase we use is seize every opportunity to treat people the right way. People will remember how they're treated, and frankly, it's not that hard. It's not that hard, and we're all fellow human beings. Sometimes we get into this mode, and
See, there was an older police officer in the car with him.
Yeah.
But what I was afraid of, if I went out and spoke to the other police officer who I assumed was the instructor, that they could go in the house and take my husband and put him in jail.
Well, and you're in a vulnerable place. That's the worst part of that.
And I don't know the law.
Yeah. So it has to do, and I'm willing to bet you that John feels much the same way. I think we probably agree on this, but it has to do with that improvement, that change that we always have to really be attentive to. Respectfulness, treating people the right way, and no matter what their situation, particularly when they're vulnerable, particularly at the worst moments of their lives and things are happening that are bad, we need to be even more attentive to treating people with respect, with humility, and view people as this is my mom or my sister or my daughter. And again, I was talking about the in-service trainings that I attended. That was part of that communication. And as you're mentioning it too, I'm looking at some of these officers, and it makes me think they're feeling the same way. Like, we don't like it when officers do that because it doesn't help us,
No,
and it
I
doesn't
know
help
it.
the way we're viewed. So,
No, that's exactly right. And it's a question of values. It's a question of who we hire and what values we have when we hire them in the first place. To me, that's the most critical thing, is we have to hire the right people. I like to say they have to have the heart of a servant, because that's what we do. We serve the public, and that's so absolutely critical. But it also comes from a leadership standpoint. Are the other peer officers providing the right leadership? Are the master police officers, the two strikers like we have on the back here, is he providing the right leadership? Are we, as bosses, from the sheriff all the way down, letting our officers know this is not okay? We are not going to tolerate this, that kind of behavior.
See, I didn't
How long ago did this happen?
further.
Let me ask you
Yeah.
that. How long ago?
Oh, this was a number.
Long time ago, but you still remember it, right?
Oh, yes.
And you bring it up time. It makes such a huge effect on people. Huge effect. And your son was a police officer for all these years.
Yes, in fact, he was in training at that time, and I informed
Well, that is a long time ago then.
Yeah,
I know,
and
Joe.
I informed him that. I said,
And we all cringe.
Remember,
Every cop in this room cringes when we hear those
anyway.
stories. But it needs to be fixed. And it's as bosses, as leaders in the organization, it's our job to fix that. And so you've been waiting for a question, yes, from Four Creeks.
Yes, so my concern is that we're going to have another annexation here, which is going to reduce the population for the unincorporated area of King County, which means that there will be less deputy jobs in unincorporated King County, so there'll be funding cuts. And we've seen this happen quite often in the last few years. How do you feel about funding for the sheriff's office and setting up a different form of funding for the sheriffs? Because these continued cuts and downsizing doesn't work for the communities. This community here had to fight to keep their storefront office. West Hill had to fight to keep theirs. We lost ours. And it'll probably never come back. And that citizen interaction on the local level is important to making a safe and good community. And in our case, the nearest precinct office now is in the city of Sammamish, probably 10, 15 miles away. So there's no quick interaction for the citizen to go to their public safety officers and ask the questions or ask for help or get that personal interaction.
So we've devolved, the sheriff's office has devolved into a police department that doesn't have a police station. You're right. I mean, in Four Creeks, in the southeast King County, you have to drive to Sammamish to walk into a police department. Or you can go to Covington. We've got a little closet there for our unincorporated deputies in Covington. Or you can go to Maple Valley, but those are contract cities. And the county doesn't have any money. They'll be the first to tell you that. Believe me, they will be the first to tell you they don't have any money, unless it's for a ferry system or something like that. We are facing real serious problems about how we're going to fund public safety in King County. And I don't have an answer for you. I'd love to see a public safety tax, an increase in the sales tax to pay for public safety. We tried that a couple of years ago, couldn't get it passed. Maybe we need a bond taxing district like the fire departments use, because they always seem to be able to get those passed, but the politicians don't like that. And in this economic climate, I don't think we're ever going to get the citizens to vote for something that they perceive as raising their taxes, not until the economy comes back. So that leaves us working with the county council and the county executive to get as much funding as we can. And the way I'm going to handle that is I'm not going to publicly fight at least, with the Dow Constantine or the county council. I've seen my predecessors do that. And quite frankly, it's counterproductive. It hasn't worked. We haven't gotten any more money. In fact, we've probably gotten less when we pick fights with them. It doesn't work. I mean, I'm more than happy to go behind closed doors and pound on the desk and make my case of why the sheriff's office needs money. But I'm not going to do it publicly. I'm also going to go hand in hand with the social service providers, because they are just as important as we are out there on the streets, keeping the public safe. In the past, we've fought with them for funding, and I'm not going to do that. We need not to be fighting with each other for those limited dollars that are out there. And there is no good answer for this, folks. There is no good answer about how we're going to fund the King County Sheriff's Office in unincorporated King County into the future. We have to be very, very careful about how we spend our dollars. We have to be business smart about how we do that. And we have to make our case, and you as well. The reason the Skyway got their storefront officer back is because the squeaky wheel gets the grease. They made their case to the county council, and it came back. And that's probably the same way here in the White Center. And for some reason, it didn't happen in Four Creeks. Maybe they weren't as organized or whatever, but knowing Flo and the Pruitts, I'm quite surprised that it didn't come back.
Right.
But storefront officers are critical. Those and SROs are absolutely critical. But I don't have a good answer for you.
Yeah, I would refer you to a couple things. Number one, I mean, again, it's one of the reasons I took this job is as I saw as the chief at Kent that system, and we're kind of going on this cycle that just keeps doing this, where there's layoffs and there's sort of these cuts across the board and then service cuts, and then we start to run overtime really high, which results in budget deficits, which results in more layoffs, and then we have less people to deal with, and we're just doing this. And it was going on, and then John talked about the precincts closing, and that was a budget-driven decision. And it was just, we just keep doing this, and it kind of keeps heading downhill. And I would refer you to, again, you can certainly go to our website and look at the business plan that we developed over the past year, which is very long, but really what it comes down to is where are we going with this in a productive way? So it comes down to this. I agree completely with John that this fighting with the executive is not productive, and you don't see me fighting with the executive. I work with the executive. I think Dow's doing a very good job, and we work together very, very well because we're starting to really focus on the bottom line and what it looks like rather than shouting at each other. And that's been really good. I mean, it's been a very, very productive outcome, and it comes from the fact that I have a municipal perspective. I'm used to having a mayor and a city council, so independent sheriff fighting has its place, but we also, money's money, and we have to figure out a way to provide public safety. Secondly, I have really been pushing very hard as the sheriff on regionalizing services and working together and partnering, getting away from a perspective that some cities have had that the sheriff's office comes to take you over and to tell you what to do. Quite frankly, that's a perception we've had. It's not been very positive. I saw it when I was in Kent. And my approach is we want to partner. We want to partner with municipal cities and find ways to save money. That's the way to start to make this sustainable. And then finally, and I would say most importantly, some of the changes I've made, and again, they've been bumpy. I mean, there's some officers that are not entirely happy with them. But some of the staffing changes we've made, and we've had to adjust and go through with the way that we're moving deputies around, it's very difficult, but the fact is, it is reducing our overtime use, and the end result is that we'll have the money to not have to hold so many vacancies, so we can start to staff unincorporated back up. That's where we're going with this, so that we have the money and we're not just going into this overtime spiral that just gets worse every year, and to start to build it up structurally. That's exactly where I'm trying to go as the sheriff, and we're starting to see that come out that way right now. So it's not a perfect solution, but it is a much better solution than what we've been doing. So thank you.
The gentleman mentioned annexation of this area. That's not a done deal.
Never is.
No. So can you do a comparison for me of if we stay unincorporated or if we become part of Burien?
My experience has been that every time an area annexes, they get more police service than they had before. I can tell you that. But I can't speak for what the city of Burien is going to do. But I've lived through the annexation of SeaTac. I've lived through the annexation of where Tukwila took over Allentown, and where the market is over there on the other side of Pack Highway at 144th, and of course what Burien has done, and on the east side with Finn Hill and Panther Lake, and all of those areas, the police presence has gone up. Okay.
What I would add to that is I would compare it to my experience. When I was the chief in Kent, Fairwood was annexed from the sheriff's office to Kent, so I had it from that perspective. And I would just caution you that in Kent we had estimated that our staffing would be, I think, up in the 20s for Fairwood, and I think it ended up being about 12, just because of budget pressures. So, nail down the numbers, in other words, and some things will change. But the fact is it was more staffing than existed before. That's true. The second thing is that the Burien annexation is a little bit different because there's an element of, we don't want to lose that because we love serving White Center, but the fact is if it becomes Burien, Burien's one of our contract partners. So basically you would get, in most cases, many of the same deputies who would put on dark blue uniforms that say Burien Police on the side. And my sense as well in having my conversations with Mike Martin, who's the city administrator, Mayor Bennett, and others, has been that they are very committed to staffing up. They want to make, Burien a community, and I don't mean to speak for Mayor Bennett or Mike Martin, but my sense is that they're really committed to ensuring that staffing is at a point where I think we had a gentleman who talked about sort of the difference between the two, the border. So I can't speak for them, but every experience I've ever seen is that when that city has made that commitment, that it improves police service purely because of numbers. I mean, more cops is always better. Visibility is always better. And to have our deputies serving as Burien police officers for White Center is something that I would look forward to. But at the end of the day, it's a local decision.
And the reality is, the cities don't have any money.
Yeah.
Just ask them and they'll tell you that. And I'm here to tell you the county doesn't have any money either, and we have even less than the cities, because the cities have a taxing option that the county doesn't. They can have a utility tax. By state law, counties cannot impose a utility tax. And until that state law changes, counties are in big trouble. It's a structural problem that's always going to make them less. The only advantage that King County has is we do so much, King County does so much contracting, and that's so good for King County, and it's so good for the cities. The economies of scale are tremendous. They're absolutely tremendous by having that, and the cities get a better deal because they get a first-class police agency to do their policing. They don't have to worry about lawsuits, they don't have to worry about unions, and when they have a horrendous homicide or a really bad accident, a fatal accident, they have an agency, a police agency that can do that investigation, that has the experience to do that. So it's a huge advantage to the cities.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
When Sue was sheriff, she tried to get a 0.5% in sales tax, and King County Council deep six it. They didn't even give the taxpayers a chance to vote for it or against it. This makes me feel that the council doesn't care about safety.
Well, there was one ballot measure that would have raised the sales tax. It would pay for a new youth center, and then some of the money would have gone towards public safety, and that was voted down. The one thing you have to remember about the county council, there's 9 people on the county council, only 2 of them have any unincorporated area to speak of that they represent. Reagan Dunn and Kathy Lambert, exactly. And the rest, Larry Phillips has got Magnolia and Queen Anne. He doesn't care a whole lot about unincorporated King County. So it's difficult. It's one of the problems that we face when we deal with the county council is they don't necessarily always care about unincorporated King County. 2 of them do, most of them don't. So we have to make our case. And some of them are really pretty good. I mean, certainly Larry Gossett got the storefront deputy back, helped get that storefront deputy back in Skyway.
But Chair, your question also speaks, and I think there was a previous comment about public safety taxing zones and those kinds of things. If you look at the annexation as it's developed in King County just because of growth management over time, and the fact that we have areas like Skyway and the tax base that's related to it and cities next to it that have a completely different taxing structure and all the things that we're talking about, I think everybody recognizes that's not a great way to do business. And if you really want to create public safety, I mean, if I could wave my hand and do it the right way, is you would create districts that would overlay entire areas that would still have some local control so people could decide, how much do I want to pay for public safety? But at the same time, we shouldn't have the haves and the have-nots based purely upon taxing and utility rates and things like that. So ensuring that you have local control, but doing it in terms of public policy that's really good, so you don't have these little pockets of that sometimes that we're dealing with, even though we take so much pride, in serving those areas. The fact is, we're trying to get to a place where there's a good, robust funding source for public safety and the courts and the jails, because right now it's very fragmented. And I'll go back to my previous comment. It's one of the reasons I took this job, is as a separately elected independent sheriff, I have a platform to begin to say, how do we partner and start to do this right, and talk to people like Dow Constantine and the council and say, here's what we've been doing. How do we do it differently? Let's ask the question. And what would it look like if you could start from a clean slate and do it the right way, so that our good police officers, the men and women of the sheriff's office and our separate municipal departments, don't have to worry all the time about layoffs every 3 years. And the fact is, fire departments do this really well. I mean, they're ahead of this stuff. Unfortunately, I think that that's been pushed so far that politically it's very difficult to do right now, to do it like the fire departments did. So we have to have a conversation about it.
And we're fighting state law as well.
Yeah,
As I mentioned, we're fighting state law. It's just not a question of just getting the county executive, the county council on our side. We also have to deal with Olympia.
Yeah.
I know that it's such a gray area right now with the medical marijuana markets. But we have a unique situation in White Center where we actually have what's called a farmer's market. So groups of folks come in, and it's operating just about 5 or 6 days a week now. And they set up like vendors, and people come in and they're smoking marijuana inside this building. And what we've observed is that people are leaving there and selling their medical marijuana to people waiting outside. It's impacting a business that shares that building next door, a restaurant, because the smells are wafting into their restaurant and turning customers away, and plus the fact that we have all these people now just kind of hanging out around this facility. So my question is, what can we do as citizens as far as calling 911 or the business next door, or how does the sheriff's department see? Because the county has no rules or regulations on this. So, we're stuck with this.
I'll start with that one if you don't mind. Let me talk a little bit about marijuana in general and the initiative that's coming up this fall and so forth. If you go to the Seattle Times and you Google my name, it'll come up with a column from 2008 or 9 when I was the chief in Kent, where I talk about this very issue. And when I was the chief in Kent, we seized 11 pounds of medical marijuana from someone, and the judge ordered us to give it back because it was medicine under the law. But we had to give it back in weekly doses, so I was actually the largest drug distributor in Kent County for a while. But it pointed to the surreal Twilight Zone nature of the law. And my point was, this does not serve us. It is not good for the rule of law. It is not good for our criminal justice system. It's sending a horrible message to our kids. And I firmly believe in medical marijuana. I think that there's compassionate use. I completely believe in it. And what I have been suggesting for years is that we need clarity. Just decide. And I have been supporting actively clarity. We just need to decide what it is and say what's legal and what is not. And if it's legalization and the initiative passes, so be it. As the sheriff, I have said publicly, I'm fine with that. It's not going to negatively affect public safety. But it gets down to, let's define what's right, what's legal and what is not, what's okay and what is not, so that we can really send a message to kids. This is what this is, and this is what is not okay. It's not so mushy. And then secondly, no, you don't get to go and smoke marijuana out in front of a restaurant, because that's not okay. You can't smoke cigarettes in a restaurant. You can't smoke cigarettes at a bus stop. You can't smoke marijuana at a bus stop. And believe it or not, we're starting to have that conversation. I can use marijuana in a bus stop because it's medicine. No, you can't. And the direction I've given to the deputies is, I know it's ambiguous right now, but public use is a line that we don't cross, and we're going to prosecute that. And Dan Sederberg's agreed to prosecute that. So right now in this gray area we are, that's what we're doing, is trying to work with how does it affect public safety, how does it affect business and quality of life, and what can we do about that? And until we have better clarity, we're going to really draw the line on public use. So those are the things, that's the direction as a sheriff I provided to people like BJ. But until we have clarity, and I really want clarity, including legalization, that's going to continue to be something that is really, really difficult to enforce, and that's not good for us.
I think clarity is all well and good. I have nothing against clarity. But I was a narcotics detective for many, many years. And I'm here to tell you the war on drugs didn't work. Hasn't worked, is not going to work, period. So I am in favor of Initiative 502, the legalization of marijuana. Not because of clarity, because the law hasn't worked. Marijuana was made illegal in the 30s because of a racial issue. We have arrested African Americans primarily, disparate arrests, disparate sentences for years and years and years, and it's time to put a stop to that. As far as I'm concerned, if the citizens of the state of Washington decide marijuana ought to be legal, that's fine. Let's let them make that decision, and that's the reason to do it. I think we'll get rid of these marijuana dispensaries, the farmers markets, and we're going to make a heck of a lot of money in tax dollars. The state estimates $600 million. I would never suggest legalizing something just for the tax dollars, but it's going to be there. And I think that we need to send a message to the federal government to get marijuana off the Schedule I list as well. So
there
my position is really pretty simple.
So they would actually like move it out of these independent dispensaries?
It can only be sold in a state licensed marijuana store by the Liquor Control Board.
Yeah, the liquor board enforcement.
Yes. You can't smoke in public, you can't sell to minors, you can't resell it, all those kinds
You
of
couldn't
things.
smoke inside the building where you were getting your medicine?
No.
So-
The Clean Indoor Act is done. Prohibit that.
So that's my position on it, plain and simple.
By your Costco size medicine.
Some more?
Of course.
It's the same idea, the same topic, okay? They're smoking inside that building. You can't smoke cigarettes in that building. You can smell it next door, so you know what's happening. Is there anything we can do about that?
You know, again, it points to this strange, surreal place that we are, because part of it too, I mean, this is all loaded with politics, and it's loaded with litigation, and it's loaded with placing the county and our individual cities in very difficult positions, where there are people who will say, the minute that you try to enforce this, I will litigate and cause, you know, greater cost to any number of people. And I'm putting myself in the position of BJ or JR or anyone who's in here, where if I had to take that call, there's an element of, well, it's inside, but it's affecting public safety, creating a nuisance outside. But you better know that it's going to be on King 5 tonight that we, you know, wrote a ticket or busted somebody for smoking medical marijuana inside their building. And, you know, it points to it's kind of this very touchy topic right now. And it's why, again, we need to decide. And again, I think legalization is perfectly fine. Our position really isn't that different. I'm just viewing it from a public safety perspective so that we can enforce public safety, finally, and do it in a way that is supported and understood by the public. I'm starting to lose my voice. Supported and understood by the public, because right now people, it's such a hot topic right now. Quick example, there was a guy who committed a sexual assault up in Shoreline, and they tracked him to a business in Seattle, North Seattle, and it happened to be a medical marijuana business. So our SWAT team went and picked him up, and we got all these calls. Why are you raiding that medical marijuana, you know, dispensary? We said, well, there's a rapist in there. Well, okay then. You know, it was sort of, and it's this strange situation we're dealing with, and that's what we're in the middle of. And frankly, it's not fair to these guys, and that's why we have to. And it's fine if it's legalized. Let's decide what we want.
I just want to ask you something about this farmer's market. Isn't it organized by anybody? Don't they have any rules of their own?
Well, they can smoke pot inside. I mean, we can't go in there, so we don't know.
You don't go to the...
No, I don't go to the medical marijuana.
No, not it's an actually separate medical marijuana place. It's not the farmer's market.
No, it's they call it a farmer's market. Yeah, it's a separate... Yeah,
Not
because
the farmer's market.
it's not at the farmer's market, right? They're calling it a farmer's market because, like, at a farmer's market, they have various vendors set up.
Do they own the building?
No.
Then I'd go after the owner.
The owner's happy to rent to them because they pay their
They won't
rent.
be happy if you start calling in code enforcement.
Well, the understanding is that they can't go in. I mean, there's gray area where they can't go in the building.
That's why it's so difficult.
We have
Yeah.
undercover narcotics agents.
Well, that's why we need to have the regulation of how
Little old
it needs
gray-haired
to be.
ladies with water cans.
It needs
One
to
thing
be
I was
legalized.
struck tonight, listening to you as you went through here, talk about, and even the farmer's market, talk about what your crime problems was in your neighborhood. And a couple of people said burglaries and car prowls and auto thefts, but most everybody said something that, in the scheme of things, you would think would be relatively minor: graffiti, litter, even a car prowl, you know, going through your glove box, that sort of thing. And to me, that's really interesting, because that's really at the crux of why we feel comfortable or uncomfortable in our neighborhood. It goes back to the broken windows theory of law enforcement. It goes back to the 1990s, actually, and in New York City, where they talk about if a window is broken out on a vacant building, the neighborhood tends to go downhill. And the gentleman here talked about Erie crossing 116th, where Erie, the graffiti is not bad, but up here in North Highline, it is. That's really the challenge for the police departments, to convince our deputies, to provide the leadership to our deputies about what's important. And it's not the felony crimes. Yeah, they're important, but we can't ignore the quality of life issues that almost all of you mentioned tonight when you came in here. That's what's important to you. That's what you see in your neighborhoods. That's what you want the police to address. Police really have not done a very good job of listening to the public. We have the attitude way too often that we're the cops and you're not. Don't tell us how to do our job. And you see that attitude, this is part of my stump speech, so I know you've heard it. You see that attitude when there's a police officer driving down the freeway at 75 miles an hour because he or she can, because he's a cop or she's a cop and you're not. We go to the 7-Eleven store and there's a police car parked in the handicap spot where the guy runs inside to get a cup of coffee and a donut, of course. Because we're the cops and you're not, so we can do that. Or most insidiously, when we don't listen to what the neighborhood, what the citizens think are important, what kind of police work that they think we ought to be doing. Don't tell us how to do our job because we're the cops and you're not. And that's the attitude that I want to kill in the police department. The leadership that I'm going to present is not going to have that attitude. We're going to listen to what you have to say. I'm going to listen to what you have to say and what you think is important. And those are the issues that I want my people, my deputies, to address. Because clearly, it was very clear tonight what you think are important.
Just a quick response. I'm looking around and looking at Sergeant Bo and BJ and JR, and I think that they listen very well. I'm proud of these guys, and John's points are well made. I've been leading that exact change as a chief and a sheriff for many, many years, almost a decade. So I've been doing that for years as a chief and a sheriff. So, but point well made, thank you.
And we have the problem of being unincorporated, so a lot of the laws, it seems like everybody gets away with everything here, where if you step across Burion's border, they don't. I mean, there's nothing enforced here, and people come here just to do that. While we have hardworking people in this community, it has a horrible reputation that it shouldn't have.
Just a couple comments on that. First of all, I think the reputation is, I truly believe this, I think the reputation is starting to turn. I really do. I think that when I mention White Center to people, they go, I've heard good things about White Center. My sense is that that's beginning to turn pretty rapidly. White Center attracts some of our best. You can see some of our best, and I'm not just saying that because they're standing in front of me. We have really invested officers. When I mentioned the long-term structural changes that we're working on in terms of reducing overtime so we can start to hire back and staff people up, has to do with what you just said. It takes cops to do that, whether it's annexation that creates that or some of the structural changes we're initiating. The other thing I'd mention is that one of the changes I made as the sheriff is instead of this just being an unincorporated zone with command staff, to make it like a contract city that we have, because our contract chiefs that are chiefs of police have real ownership and they advocate for their deputies and advocate for equipment and training. And it's something that I saw we didn't have here when I came in from the outside. So now we have Pat Butchley as the zone commander, which means he's in effect the contract chief for White Center and Skyway, and he has direct ownership like a chief of this area, and that's one of his responsibilities, is to build some of that ownership and to make sure that the deputies are paying attention to that. So, thank you.
I would like to comment that as small as this area is, we have very good response,
Yes.
that they come to our whole meetings.
And again, that's one of the reasons that we made some of those changes, is to try to enhance that.
And we don't want to lose.
Yeah.
Well, that's you, BJ.
We'll see what we can do for the position. BJ has no people skills, so I can't get fit.
So when we lost our storefront deputy, things kind of went downhill really quickly in the community. And people set up shop here, selling, what was it, Operation Center of Attention. And many of us in the community knew things were going on. We saw it. We were dealing with it. And it went on for a long time. And of course, there was the undercover portion of it for several months. But we really had to fight to get our storefront deputy back. And we know that your position is the county makes cuts, and then you have budget cuts, and then you have to make the cuts. But it just seems like we don't want to have to keep doing this fight the contract, my understanding is the contract's up in October or November for our storefront deputy, and should we start fighting now to get it back? Or?
Let me say this, again, that constant downward, every year we've got to deal with this again, is exactly what I'm trying to change structurally, so that we don't have to do that, number one. Number two, as the sheriff who has to deal with the budget and deal with the council and has to make real decisions, I don't stand in front of groups and say, I promise this and I promise that, because the fact is, I control some things, I don't control others. I will tell you this, and again, I don't stand up and pledge in front of people a lot of things, because we have to make it happen. But I would tell you that my perspective of the dynamic of White Center and Skyway, and the dynamic of the history of the storefront deputy and the work that BJ is doing is something that I think is extremely important. It's not a nice to have, it's a have to have, because that connection to the community is giant. And it has a lot to do with that perception change you're talking about, making sure people are connecting so that it's not just an area where we have unincorporated and our deputies do what they can. We want that connection. So as the sheriff, the sitting sheriff, I will pledge to you that I'm telling you straight up, I think that's extremely important. I'm going to do everything I can to maintain both storefront deputies.
And what I'm going to do is I'm going to staff from the bottom up. I'm going to start with patrol, because patrol is the most important thing that we do. 911 response is the most important thing we do. We're not going to have any areas like we had with Skyway where we had no police officers there for 8 hours a day. That is not going to happen when I'm the sheriff. I plan on stocking with officers, have storefront officers absolutely everywhere we can, and build up from there. You said it yourself. You said that when we lost the storefront deputy, things went downhill. At least that was your perception. If that's your perception, that's your reality. That's what we have to do. And when we get up, when we build that up, then we'll argue for more deputies, for detectives, for public information officers, for all those other things that we do. But we have to stock patrol first. That's where we have to put our resources, because that's what you all see, that's what matters to you, and we're going to listen to you. It's not that attitude of we're the cops and you're not, don't tell us how to do our job. That's what we're going to do, including storefront deputies, including Four Creeks. We've got to do that. That's the way to reduce crime and the fear of crime. And Steve will say, that's what we're all about, is reducing crime and the fear of crime. And patrol, uniform patrol response, 911 response is the most important thing that a police department does.
Okay, I have one question. Okay. No one else. Seattle Police has something called the Victim Support Team that goes in after a domestic violence situation. They're highly trained volunteers, and they're well vetted. Because they often happen on a weekend or late at night when the courts aren't open, and they help the victims of these crimes. Has the county thought about creating such a force?
So let me answer that first, if you don't mind, Steve. One of the things that I said when I announced, I'm going to restart Domestic Violence Unit. That's a specialized unit of detectives that investigate domestic violence crimes with the goal of getting suspects charged, even when victims and witnesses, primarily victims, recant and don't want to prosecute. This is absolutely critical, and that's where the volunteers you're talking about, Richard, or even people on the payroll can make a huge difference. Domestic violence is an absolutely insidious crime, even though most of the crimes are misdemeanors or gross misdemeanors. It affects families, it affects kids, it affects lives. And a domestic violence suspect is more likely to go on and commit another crime of violence, including homicides, than any other suspect. Steve mentioned the Cafe Racer shooting in Seattle a few months back. 6 people dead, 5 innocent people, and the suspect who shot himself. That man had 2 domestic violence arrests, one against his brother, one against his girlfriend. In both cases, the victims recanted and wouldn't testify, and he was never charged. Perhaps if there had been a dedicated domestic violence unit that could have the time, the expertise, the talent to get those 911 calls, to get the medical records, to shepherd that case through to the prosecutor's office, and the prosecutor's office would have charged him, and had he been convicted, under federal law he could not have possessed guns or ammunition. So the 5 guns that he did have, and the family was so frustrated because they knew he was mentally ill, and they called the police, and there was nothing the police could do about all those guns. Had he had that conviction, the police could have taken those guns away. Now, that's not to say he couldn't have gotten another gun and committed the crime, but at least we wouldn't have been helpless. That's why that domestic violence investigations are so important. Right now in the sheriff's office, they're being done by generalist detectives that are doing a burglary investigation one day, a larceny investigation the next, and then a domestic violence investigation. That's one of the things that I think is critical that we should be doing. And it goes right to what you're saying, is we can have people that can work with these families, because it's just critical. Victims advocates.
Just briefly, I know it's getting late. I think it's a great idea. And again, I'm the sheriff, so I have to deal with actual bodies that we're going to deploy. So, I'd love to have that unit. I'd love to have domestic violence unit. I'd love to have a crisis intervention team like Seattle does that goes out and deals with unmanaged mental illness. There's a lot of needs out there, and we need to start to prioritize them. So one of the things I heard you say is, could we potentially access volunteers or some other ways to potentially fund that with the limited resources we have? But I think it's a great idea. Thank you.
Okay. Just one general question. If you had to say one day in your law enforcement career, what is your best day in law enforcement and your worst day in law enforcement? I'll give you a minute to think about that. I just want to tell everyone that you can still register to vote. You can register until October 8th by mail, October 28th in person, and the election is on November 8th. And don't forget to vote.
My best day was after I retired. Not the day I retired, but I had been retired. And I announced I was running for sheriff. There's a lot of publicity about that. And I got a Facebook message from a guy. And he said, "You probably don't remember me, but you saved my life. And I want to thank you for that. My daughter is going to graduate from high school tomorrow. I'm married, and thank you." And I messaged him back via Facebook. I'm not sure how I figured out how to do that. And I said, "No, I don't remember you. What are you talking about?" And he said, he gave me the location. It was down in South Park. He says, "I was suicidal. You were outside my door. You talked me down. I didn't commit suicide. I'm still alive today," so on and so forth. And I have absolutely no recollection of that at all. No doubt that it happened. He knew where I was, the time period. It was the King 7 district. That's what we used to call it. And I worked down there all the time in South Park, Boulevard Park in South Park. I got to thinking about that. My God, how many other things have happened in my life as a police officer, my 36 years, that I don't remember because they were fairly routine, or I went on to the next one. And how many lives did I affect? And that really gave me a real good feeling, because I remembered why I picked that profession. And there's got to be other people out there that I had a big effect on their life. And I was kind of blown away by the whole thing. And I thought, my life has been pretty good to get that kind of a message out of the blue from somebody. And every single officer in this room has had the same thing, or maybe it hasn't happened yet, but they know there's people out there that we have had a huge impact on. And that is a very, very, very good feeling.
I'll be, like I said, I know it's getting late, I'll be very brief. But my worst day and my best day were somewhat related, as a matter of fact, and it speaks to something that, again, all the officers in here could relate to, which is, and I call it the privilege to serve. It is a privilege to do this job. It's a privilege to be there on people's worst day. It was just after I got out of training. I was a brand new patrol officer. I was 22 years old, and I was nervous because I'm by myself for one of the first times. And I got sent to a really bad car crash. It's a young woman who had gone through a windshield. She ran into a telephone pole, went through the windshield, and thrown way down the road. And she is horribly injured, horribly injured. And I get up there, and my heart's pounding, and she's clearly not going to live. I mean, clearly not going to live. You could hardly recognize her. And I'm trying to give her some oxygen and do the best I can, and trying to think, what do I do? What do I do? And pretty soon the paramedics, the firefighters, and the other officers show up, and they're putting her on a backboard, and they're trying to get a tube down her throat and so forth. And I step back, and I'm thinking, what reports do I have to do, and what else do I have to worry about traffic? And then I started to think, that was my daughter, or my mom, or my sister. What would I want for her? Because nobody was paying attention to her. So I knew I was going to get grief for this from my other officers, but I knelt down and I held her hand and I started to talk to her. And I said, this is what's going on, and you're going to be okay, and this is what's going to happen next, and this is what they're doing now. Knowing that she couldn't hear me, but it made me feel better. And they loaded her up, and off they went, and I thought, that's a bad day. That's one of my worst days, because it was one of the first times I'd really seen that kind of thing. And one of my best days was about 6 months later when I got a phone call, and she was going through rehab. It was that young woman. And she said, I want to let you know I heard every word you said. And it speaks to the privilege to serve, the honor to serve. And John referred to it. We're looking at the officers in the back, and they're all going, I've been there. I know exactly how that feels, and John referred to it the same way. So again, as we talk about the difficulties law enforcement's going through right now, remember that it's a group of human beings who are there to serve. And how do we do it better? And that's really what we've been talking about tonight. So I thank you so much for your great questions, and thank you for your interest tonight.
I can't top Steve's story. My worst day was when I went to work without my gun.
Yeah. Thanks, John.
Join us for our next meeting in January, and have a good night.